So this next panel I'm really excited about. We have some wonderful people here. So we have a similar format. We've got, from Microsoft, we've got David Claux. He's on the, he's done quite a bit with Exchange Web Services, and right now he's the lead architect on the, on the Outlook web app product. So that's really cool. So that's what you use if you're accessing Exchange remotely. So both on the Exchange Web Services side, like working with us, and on the Outlook web app side. And those are both very impressive feats in the Microsoft space. Sherman here, he actually, he has a company that's called Postbox. He's the CEO there. And formerly, let's see here. Has anybody here used Thunderbird before? I know we have Mozilla in the audience. So formerly, he was one of the original leads on the Thunderbird project. What it looked like was Mozilla was changing gears. He sort of forked the code and started Postbox, and it's a mail client that I personally use. It's an awesome product for both Windows and PCs. And before that, he was at Sun and Broderbund and at Apple. So he knows product and he knows email. And also, of course, we've got Alex here. How many of you, anybody use Boomerang? It's a great Gmail plugin. His company is called Baden. He's the CEO. In addition to Boomerang, they also have the email game, which is kind of like a stripped-down email client, as well as, is it Boomerang Calendar or Baden Calendar? Boomerang Calendar, which is a really cool tool for scheduling. So we've got folks up here that have worked on both the development side and on the front-end side of mail clients at one of the largest platforms in the world, Microsoft. One of the most popular, both used for consumer and for individuals, email platforms, Postbox, and a very popular plugin as well as client applications. So we're going to talk about kind of platforms versus clients, the things we have to consider when we're building our own product or when we're building on top of them for each of the platforms. And the format of this is that we're just going to have one formal presentation that will be by David here because as we've been hearing throughout the day, there's been a lot of announcements from Microsoft. So folks probably haven't seen Outlook web app. They probably haven't seen the new store on top of the Microsoft Office ecosystem. So we want to share that with you. This has nothing to do with this event taking place at Microsoft. We just truly believe that this is a phenomenal place both for distribution and for what people are actually using. So I hope everybody in this room gets a chance to see that. So I'm going to kick this off with David presenting, and then we'll go through, and then we'll start doing some talks. So, some Q&A.
Does this work?
Let's get you a mic stand, actually, so you have both hands. There you go. There you go.
Does it work? Yes, it does.
Gotcha.
Actually, can I? Yeah.
Sure.
David Claux, I've been working for Microsoft for 7 years now, always with Exchange. I used to be part of the Exchange Web Services team, so the platform that goes with Exchange, and for the last few years I've been working on Outlook web app, designing the new version that I'm going to quickly present to you with Outlook. So I'm kind of lucky here because I can talk about both the client and the platform, and I'm going to start with a little bit of the client because I want you all to see the great product that we just released. So just going to close this presentation. Nothing on the screen, so let me bring that back. Okay, how does that look? Pretty good. Okay, so as you may know, hopefully you do, Microsoft just shipped Office 2013. That was just a few weeks ago. Although it's not hit general availability yet, which is expected in the first quarter of 2013, the product is available to TechNet members and other lucky people. So it's already possible to get access to what I'm going to show now. And I want to start first with Outlook and get back to what David Dennis said earlier. We've got a fresh new look with Outlook, and the same goes with OWA, Outlook web app. We've tried to go metro style. I shouldn't say metro, modern style. So it's all clean. There's that blue color that you see pretty much everywhere in Outlook.com, in Outlook native client, and in Outlook web app as well. The interface has been streamlined. We've made it so that you can access actions very quickly, like to delete an email. It's now very quick. In Outlook, you can also mark an email read and unread with just one click of the mouse. Very streamlined. And Outlook web app looks very, very similar to Outlook. This is some feedback that we received in the past that Outlook and Outlook Web App looked pretty different. So now we have something that really, really looks like it's sibling on the desktop. Now, that's great and all, but what about the development platform? There's something great that we're introducing with this new release, which is called Apps for Office. For those of you who knew about the code name, it used to be called Agaves. And what we've done in the context of Outlook and Outlook Web App is made it possible for you to complement, for developers to complement the email reading experience with custom data that can be shown in a pane that I'm going to show immediately. And that's a completely contextual model, which means that those agaves, those apps, can only be shown when they're relevant, as opposed to always be shown, even when they're absolutely useless. So I have two examples here for you of agaves apps that ship out of the box with Exchange. The first one is the Bing Maps one. So it's a very simple scenario. You have that email here that contains an address. It's the Microsoft campus address. And Exchange has been smart enough to detect that there was an address in there. And based on the installed apps in the user's account, has determined that the Bing Maps app is able to do something with the address. So if the user clicks on that Bing Maps button, gets a map of the address right inside their email client. It's completely interactive. You can get directions, go to the larger map by opening another window. Again, this is completely contextual. In another email, this app would just not show up because it's irrelevant. Another example is us detecting what we call suggested meetings. So essentially, we see that in the email, the sender is suggesting a time to meet. And when you click on this, you just, we tell you that we think we found a meeting, and you're able to schedule it immediately from your email client by just clicking a button, and the email form, hopefully, come pre-populated with all the information that we found in the email. This is all based on web technologies. So you implement those apps using HTML and JavaScript, all the things that you already know about and that you want to use. And the beauty of it is that it works just as well in Outlook Web App and the Outlook Rich client. I have the same two emails here, and the same apps work exactly the same. And when I say the same apps, I actually mean it. This is exactly the same code that runs in both. You don't have to implement one version for Outlook and one version for Outlook Web App. We also support tablets, because the new OA is actually being implemented so that it works on a tablet. So obviously I don't have a tablet here. This is a kind of a simulation, but this is the interface that you would get on an iPad, for example. And we also have a dedicated user interface for phones. And as you can see, those apps, they also work on your tablet, and they would also work on your phone. Again, with a single code base. It's not completely true, because on a phone, when you have that very small screen, you probably want to implement a UI that's kind of different than the one you'd have on desktop, because you don't have the same amount of space, but your core code can be exactly the same. So this is basically what we've been doing, and there's one thing that I wanted to mention also that's not related to the development platform, but which I think is a great link with the previous presentation. We've been talking about being interrupted, multitasking, and stuff like that, and something that we've seen in OA and Outlook, and that we've actually done something about, was that people hated being forced into switching context when writing or replying to emails. Like when a new window opened, it's like you have to completely go out of your email client and be forced into that new separate experience. So what we did is that we implemented what we call inline reply, where now you have the reply form show inside the reading pane, and you still can see all your messages, you still get the notifications, you still see messages arriving in your inbox. So you're always on top of things. So you could say, well, but that's a lot of interruption. Well, but apparently, for what we've seen, people like and want to be interrupted that way because it makes them feel that they're on top of things. So anyway, that's an introduction to our platform here, and I'm going to give it out to
Cool. Can you
who's
bring up
next?
that slide, that last slide?
Sorry?
Can you bring up the last slide that was just up?
Sure,
Thanks
absolutely.
so much. So thank you, David, so much for sharing about the latest in the Microsoft platform. Thank you,
Actually, I
everybody.
can't, sorry.
No, I'll bring it up, no problem. So we have two other wonderful panelists here that have a lot of experience, not just being part of a platform, as some of you actually both have, but also building on top of it. So maybe you could start, Alex, if you could share just a little bit about your experiences there.
Like, can y'all hear me? Okay, cool. There it is. Yeah, so my name's Alex. I'm the CEO of Baden. We make a suite of plugins and email productivity tools that are kind of all over the map. The one we're best known for is Boomerang, which is available for, we built it on top of Gmail, we built it on top of Outlook, and now we've also built it on top of Yahoo Mail. And it's basically message scheduling. You can write a message and send it later. You can take a message and bring it back to the top of your inbox. Or you can track responses, so if you don't get a reply, it'll come back to the top of your inbox after a couple of days. We also have, like Jared mentioned, a calendar plugin that's a really smart integrated calendar experience for Gmail. It does all of that stuff that David was showing where we detect locations and times. We had to build it in JavaScript so it could run on top of Gmail. So that was kind of an adventure. And then we also built a lightweight email client in the form of the email game, which is kind of a gamified workflow tool for your email. So we've done a lot of, we've gone down the client road. We've also gone down the plugin road for 3 different platforms. And I'm happy to be able to share some of the things we've learned as we've gone down that path. I'll add one more thing. We started working on this back in 2010. So we got about 2 years of experience doing this. Boomerang for Gmail has been downloaded about 1.5 million times. And we're profitable now off of the plugins.
Cool.
Round of applause for that.
Thank you.
Sherman, maybe you could share just a little bit about your experience at Postbox, just so folks have a little background, just so we can share stuff, so it's not just Microsoft, right?
Sure. So my name is Sherman Dickman. I work at Postbox. Point of clarification, I actually wasn't one of the leads on the Thunderbird project at Mozilla. I was working on the product management side, primarily on Firefox. But the leads of Thunderbird, David Bienvenu and Scott McGregor, and myself all shared this similar passion for communications. And we were all at Mozilla together. And it was an interesting time. In 2007, when we founded Postbox, the email space seemed kind of dead. There really wasn't a whole lot going on. There wasn't a Zobni or a Gist or another inbox that was visible, or a Baden, or many of the companies up here. It was really kind of a dead space. And the email clients that shipped as part of the standard OS distributions were, sort of like checkbox applications. They had to be as good as one would expect, in order to include it in the OS, but we didn't really feel as though a whole lot was being put into Outlook Express and the Mail app at Apple at that time. And so we just thought that was crazy. Like, what is happening here? I mean, we have, a web browser which everyone uses, but also people spend an awful lot of time in email. So why is there so much energy and innovation going on in the web space, but absolutely nothing going on in email? Mm-hmm. And while we were at Mozilla, it was pretty clear that the Mozilla Corporation's charter was to promote the open web, and that's a really good charter. We supported that, but we looked at the email space and started thinking to ourselves, but what about the end users? Okay, how do we make them more productive and successful at work so they can spend less time managing email and more time with the people that they care about doing the things they enjoy? And so we came up with this metric, if we could save people 10 minutes a day, every work day, that equates to about a week of their life. And what is a week of your life worth? Is it worth $1,000? Is it worth $29.95? Right now we're at $9.95. We think that that there's a good value exchange there. So we left Mozilla and we founded Postbox with the mission of making people more productive and successful at work. And all of our design decisions and platform decisions and architecture decisions were all centered around that goal. All right. And it was sort of a natural extension for us to go into the client space because we have a background with Thunderbird. So we chose the desktop application approach. But we also evaluated many other approaches. We looked at everything. And I can speak to what we looked at and why we rejected that, and probably in a follow-on conversation or follow-on question. But I could just speak to the client. And we really wanted to move mail forward. We really wanted to move the email experience forward and to solve some of the most critical problems that people are experiencing in email. And so we did all the research. We read Victoria Bellotti. We read Nicholas Deschanel. Stephen Rohal, Paul Moody, Victor Gonzalez, Gloria Mark. All the usual suspects. And it's kind of neat to see Gloria here because Gloria's research was probably the most influential into the design of Postbox. And we wanted to not just come out with a new offering that had novel features. We wanted to systematically and one by one chip away at the core causes of overload and anxiety and stress, as opposed to just the symptoms. And the only way we could do that was by controlling the entire client, by just doing the full Monty, soup to nuts, the entire experience, user experience, UI, everything. And that's why we put everything that we had behind the client approach,
Sure.
To fundamentally move it that much further.
Oh, that makes sense. And yet both you and Outlook still have notifications on by default, right? For new messages? Notifications on by default, new messages? It's okay, we'll live with that.
We have a bug in 3.05 that we're going to fix in 3.06 where some of the Windows notifications slipped into the Mac side, but we have notification support for both Notification Center in Mac OS and also in Growl.
Well, I was just
and we have our
referring to the
built-in.
fact that we get notified when we get new mail.
Yes.
That's all. And Alex, now you specifically, you started actually with an Outlook product and then went to Gmail. A lot of folks don't know that here. But in both cases, even email game today still isn't your sort of signature thing. You decided in both cases to go on top of the platform. Could you speak to why you made that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. So we looked at the same papers and the same research that Sherman did, and we started thinking about if we want to build a mail client, what do we need to have? And if you don't have autocomplete, no one will use your mail client. If you don't handle attachments right, no one's going to use your mail client. If you don't render messages correctly, no one's going to use your mail client. And so it's sort of like death by 80,000 cuts because there's so many things that you just have to have that's core functionality in a mail client. And forking Thunderbird's a good way to get those things. But we really thought that webmail was really kind of the path to go down. And we didn't really see a good place to fork the webmail, to fork a webmail client to get all those features built in. So what we decided to do instead is we looked at it and we said, what are the core valuable things we want to build, and what's the best way to get them in there? And the conclusion we drew is, let's take the platforms that are leading right now. Let's look at Outlook or let's look at Gmail. And instead of trying to replicate all the features inside of those, why don't we just add the stuff we want to build on top of it and let them handle all of the 80,000 features you have to have. That way we don't have to think about, in terms of distribution, we don't have to think about will people switch to our mail client. They can keep using what they're using. All we had to worry about is can we provide enough value ourselves to make the product useful to the people who we want to reach.
Sure. No, I want to highlight one of the points that Alex just made, which is, it's very interesting to think about what it is when you're trying to, to provide a very simple feature, whether you have to recreate all the other stuff just to get your new value out there. So in your case, you decided to build on top so that you could, take advantage of all of Gmail's work or all of Outlook's work. But in other cases, even other products, somebody may have seen, the TechCrunch finalist Liaise from not very long ago, which doesn't have a product right now. It doesn't exist anymore. And their product, they decided to build on top of Outlook, so they didn't go the platform route, or rather they built on top of a platform rather than going the client route. And their challenge is that their product finished sentences for you, did a bunch of semantic analysis, added tasks automatically. But they had to put a new text editor in Outlook. Now, a text editor in Outlook that many people use is called Microsoft Word, and for better or worse, it's hard to recreate Microsoft Word. So the fundamental challenge there is that even though they were inside of another product that already existed, they had this huge behavior that they had to try to recreate of a word processor. So it's very interesting when you integrate, figuring out which of these little things are going to be the pain points. Because if attachments don't work, then it's going to be really, really hard to innovate on something else. If the autocomplete doesn't work, you're absolutely right. So everybody in this room, I see so many startups building email products. Think about if there's anything you're taking away from people, because they will not get the real benefit if there's something else that's holding them back. Like for example, right now, the Gmail ecosystem is so rich that it's hard to sometimes go to a client, perhaps. Maybe you could speak to that. But Sherman, have you seen people wanting to go to ecosystems with plugins? I know you have plugins as well, but how have you found other plugins to sort of be one of those things that's a barrier to signing up, or not?
I don't think it's a barrier for us. I mean, we do have a plugin architecture, and there are some plugins that plug into Postbox. We do have a number of Thunderbird users who want some of the Thunderbird plugins to operate within Postbox, but those plugins have to be revved by the developers themselves, just due to the limitations of the plugin architecture. So we can't take unmodified Thunderbird plugins in. It's one of the challenges of doing a whole client. It's kind of an all or nothing proposition, right? So it's a mature market. We're no longer competing against non-consumption. Everyone has an email client. For us, it's a matter of getting people to switch from the existing thing over to our thing. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of friction in that process. People are just more likely to stick with the thing that they know, however broken, because it's easier for them. Mm-hmm. Two, it's not like what you're able to do, which is, hey, take the existing thing that you're using and just add a little of this and it makes it that much better, right? You actually have to switch, okay, from Outlook over to our thing, or from Thunderbird over to our thing. And that's pretty disruptive in people's workflow. People are reluctant to install software on their desktop. They don't know if it's going to blow their desktop up or introduce a virus or what have you. There's all sorts of setup and configuration steps you have to perform. And then it's just getting used to a whole new user interface. And so there's a lot of barriers. But despite that, we still convert a very, very, very high percentage of people who download the product over to paid customers. And then the other, I guess negative of a desktop client is you have distribution challenges. So we are not Microsoft, we're not Apple, right? Mm-hmm. Where we can put things in the operating system and say, hey, here you go, Yeah. Just things to think about if you're thinking about doing a standalone client.
Sure. And maybe I have a question for you, actually, David, just as it relates. The reason why I use Postbox, I like the offline capabilities, I like a client experience. But one of the things you got right was the fact that you have an offline, or you have a client experience that does Gmail right. And I was an Outlook user. I trained on Outlook for years. And Gmail plus Outlook, no, it's not. It's an unhappy face. It's almost optimized against it. So I'm curious, is there things that are happening to sort of make those two systems work together better within the newer versions of Outlook?
Yeah.
Yep.
Gmail, not too long ago, implemented EAS, so ActiveSync. So mm-hmm. Gmail themselves recognized that it was necessary for them to let existing devices, phones, tablets, and even computers talk to their servers without being forced into using their web interface. So I would say that Google took the first steps into making things better. Mm-hmm. And now in Outlook, you have a native, in Outlook 2013, you have native EAS connectivity, so you can connect to your Gmail account just the same way you'd connect to any other account, even Microsoft accounts.
So that's news to me. So for those who aren't familiar, there's three different things. There's IMAP, there's Exchange Web Services, and there's Exchange ActiveSync. And Exchange Web Services is how a product talks to, or a server talks to a server fundamentally to get access to Exchange. IMAP is sort of a lower level protocol that's just accessing email, not accessing contacts and calendar. And it's how most of us, we're able to support Yahoo, for example, but there isn't anything richer. There aren't more APIs. We're using just IMAP. But Exchange Web Services is the direction you've been going. But fundamentally, up until now, Exchange ActiveSync has been exclusively for mobile device.
Yeah, so Exchange ActiveSync is the protocol that we recommend devices use when they need to interface with an Exchange mailbox, because it's been optimized for bytes over wire. Mm-hmm. It's power friendly and everything. But there are many other needs that are not necessarily met by EAS, especially when you want to implement maybe a server-side application. And that's where the Exchange Web Services come in. Not that Exchange Web Services are not meant for client applications. Apple has implemented their latest mail app on OS X on top of AWS. They completely rewrote their interface. Mac Outlook is also completely implemented on top of AWS. So those are products that prove that AWS is kind of a complete API that lets...
Yeah. But you mentioned that EAS, that Exchange Active Sync, a mobile protocol, is what the latest version of Outlook is using to connect to Gmail. That's news to me.
So it's yeah, absolutely. I mean, essentially, Outlook has that discovery mechanism by which it tries to use the best possible protocol. And yes, EAS is one of them now.
I've never heard of that. Okay, well, that's new. So now the experience should be very different for Gmail and Outlook 13.
Well, you should have access to pretty much anything you have access on your phone or your tablet. So your email, your calendar, your contacts, just the same, with offline capabilities. Absolutely.
I'm excited to check that out. So, very, very, very cool. So, we've just talked about some of these technical things involved. We've gotten pretty technical, actually. We've shifted gears a little bit. From a technical perspective, I know both of you guys, Sherman and Alex, had your series of challenges, whether it be the changing of UIs or being able to connect to different protocols, or do we support Exchange, do we support other platforms, et cetera. Could you speak to some of your biggest hurdles and whether if you had known what those were, if you would do things the same way today, technically?
Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge for us, especially on the Gmail side of things, is that there's not really a supported API for doing front-end integration. The way that all of us do it, Rahul's nodding in the background from Rapportive, what we all do is we build Chrome and Firefox extensions. We grab the DOM, the document object model, from Gmail, we look at the HTML, we insert our stuff in using JavaScript, and when Gmail rolls out a change, that breaks. So you kind of see it coming at 4 o'clock one afternoon. You get a weird bug report and you can't reproduce it. And then 9 o'clock the next morning, you get 2 more reports and you're like, oh crap, something's changing. And then you log into your 20 test accounts, you see if you can find it. And so it's kind of a maintain or die mentality that you have to have if you're doing a Gmail plugin, because things are shifting under your feet. And it's also true for the way Chrome extensions work. They changed the Chrome Web Store installation policy, the server APIs, like everything's it's a bunch of shifting sands. And that's the world that we picked, that's the world we chose to live in. But I'd say that's probably the number one obstacle that we had to overcome. Beyond that, I think, back when we were starting back in 2010, the browser plugins weren't nearly as powerful as they are now. So if you wanted to use jQuery, you couldn't. The way you had to build things was a grease monkey script in Firefox, and you had to write everything in native JavaScript, which was excruciatingly painful. Things have gotten better now. We've got the browser plugin support architectures that make responding to these changes easier and better. But I'd say that was probably the biggest shock to us is how much maintenance, and we've kind of built an anti-lifestyle business, because if we go live on an island for 6 months, our service will stop working.
Sherman?
Well, a desktop client, we're a little bit more straightforward. I could go live on an island and probably do pretty well.
Will you invite me?
Sure, come on by. So, most of the technical challenges that we run into are just little nits. So for example, we have a really great topics implementation, which is how you categorize your emails. And we use the IMAP keyword standard, but not all email servers support that standard. So for example, tags work on AOL.com, but not AIM.com. All right. So we've had some problems with Curio servers not supporting that. So when people tag a message and they flip to a different folder and then go back, the tag is gone. And it's just because the server itself doesn't implement the standard. Other nits, things like Conversation View. We were the first desktop client to support Conversation View. But we rely on this thing called the reference header ID, which is how you relationally associate these messages together, okay? Some email servers strip that away, which makes it really hard to, relate the messages together. So we have to have these sophisticated fallback mechanisms, like, okay, who's the sender, and try to match the sender up with the subject, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Little gotchas like that. Gmail, another good example. One thing you can do when you're using our advanced search is you can do partial word searches. A lot of IMAP servers support partial word searches. Gmail doesn't support partial word searches, so it just doesn't work on that server where it does on another server. And then we've gotten bitten a couple times on just kind of lower level platform things. For example, with each revision of the Mac OS, more and more services are sort of yanked away from us because they just tighten up the sandbox more and more. So for example, we had an integration with iCal that used AppleScript to communicate between Postbox and iCal. Well, they just removed the script folders from iCal, and that doesn't work anymore. So sometimes you have the platform shifting under your feet a little bit, but for the most part, they're just minor nits, nothing major.
Sure. Anything you want to add, David? Or?
Yeah, in terms, we're kind of lucky in Outlook Web App. I'm not part of the Outlook native client team. They have problems that are very similar to what Sherman just described because Outlook does not support just Exchange, obviously. In the Outlook Web App team, it's a bit different. Obviously, we're talking to Exchange, and that's it. So we don't have to have those fallback mechanisms. Everything just works. My perspective is also a bit different because I've been involved in creating the APIs that clients can use to talk to Exchange. And again, it's just one platform, but it's really important that Exchange makes it possible for anyone to create rich applications. And so you were asking what we would do differently if we had known. Well, Exchange has a long history, and there have been quite a few APIs shipped for Exchange across the years. And ideally, if we had to do it differently, we'd just go straight to the Exchange Web Services. But the fact is that the needs when the first version of Exchange shipped were not the same as the needs as they are right now. The web technologies were not what they are now. You're not always connected. You cannot always rely on a server to perform actions against the mailbox. But definitely when we implemented the Exchange Web Services in 2007, we had the feeling that we were finally creating an API that would live on, and that offered all the capabilities that developers needed, and that was combining the best of what WebDAV used to be and the best of what CDO used to be, two kind of competing technologies, because you could do some stuff with CDO and some stuff with WebDAV, and CDO had to run on the server, whereas WebDAV applications could talk over the internet. So with AWS, we've fixed all of that, and yeah, ideally we would have gone there much sooner, but sometimes you need to learn from your mistakes, and you need to learn from the industry and what's going on.
Sure. I'd like to open this up to questions. I've got more, but if there's other folks in the audience that'd like to ask for these wonderful panelists.
Just a quick question on Agave.
Could you introduce yourself? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Andrew Lai from Taskbox. Quick question on Agave. Is there a difference in support as far as the Outlook client experience for Mac versus PC?
So Agaves are not supported in the native Mac client, so Mac Outlook is not supported currently. However, you can still use OWA, Outlook Web App, on a Mac in your browser, any browser, and you'll get support for Agaves in there. But no, there's no support in Mac Outlook for now.
Why can't you guys just get along?
That's a great question. It's it's a question for which I don't have an answer.
Hi, Carell from Line from Q. Just a comment about EWS. I should definitely not be a Microsoft spokesperson, but I recently learned EWS's Spring. I found the managed API was very well written, very clear, very easy to use, behaved as expected.
So I love you for that. The managed API is my baby. Actually designed it and implemented it. So.
Maybe you could speak to the other API, the Java API for Exchange Web Services.
The AWS Java API is our recognition that the #1 programming language out there is Java. It's not C#, it's not JavaScript, it's not PHP, it's Java. So we needed to address the same problem as the one we addressed with AWS when we created the AWS Managed API, which is the protocol in itself is very hard to consume if you're going to write XML requests and parse XML responses by hand. And even auto-generated proxies don't do a very good job at it. So we decided to port the AWS Managed API to Java. So I know it's not necessarily been as powerful or as
Updated?
updated as the AWS Managed API. So the good news is that there's going to be an update soon. I'm told that it should happen by the end of the year. So the role of that update is going to be to catch up in terms of functionality with the AWS Managed API 1.2. And we're also going to change the terms in the EULA just to allow companies to make modifications to the API, compile a binary, and ship that binary as part of their application without having to push the changes to us first and then us creating a new version. So this is not something that is technically allowed for now to just recompile with your change and send. I don't know if anybody has done it, but it's not supposed to happen. It's going to be allowed now. We're also going to put in place a mechanism by which you're going to be able to give us the full property of your changes. Essentially, you're going to be able to say, hey, Microsoft, I made changes. I'm giving them to you. Please incorporate them into the API. This is necessary. It's not because we want to own those things. It's just because legally, we wouldn't be able, given the license terms, we wouldn't be able to recompile the library with those changes and ship it. We're just subject to the same terms, essentially.
We have time for one more question. Sir.
Hi, Wolf Arnold with Handle. I'm curious how the customers of your different applications flock to your specific applications for various reasons. So, like, I'm sure there's differences in what customers want and need for web plugins versus desktop clients, and I'm curious what the top 3 needs are for each of your client categories.
So speaking about distribution for the two of you.
If I had a list of the top 3 things that we could do that would attract more customers, we would do them. The most interesting thing about developing Postbox is that if you ask 100 people what you want, you're going to get 95 different answers of what they want out of their email client. The usage models are so different across everybody that there's no silver bullets that you can implement that would get yet another big group of people. Sometimes, like with the integration of the Gmail specific features, we were able to open it up to more Gmail users. But really, when you query people and go deep and ask them what is it you really need, you almost get as many answers as there were people that responded. So it's a little frustrating when you're doing your roadmap planning. And particularly for a bootstrapped startup such as ourselves, as a bootstrap startup, our margin of error is only about 5%. We have to be right about 95% of the time. We don't have millions in the bank, which allow us to make all sorts of mistakes. So we have to be extremely strategic about what it is that we do and what we implement, and very, very careful, and make sure that it addresses a very, very specific need that is going to be important and valued by people, and weigh that against what we call sort of like confection features that are just kind of cool and attract people just because of its coolness. Like, for example, some of our social integration features, those don't speak directly to some of the problems that have been outlined by folks such as Gloria, but they're fun and people talk about them. So, but generally speaking, by the time someone downloads and installs Postbox, it is because they are so frustrated with the existing solution that they will go through the switching cost of downloading, installing, configuring, and customizing and getting used to the new user interface because their pain is so deep, from the existing solution. And it's just a matter of like capitalizing on that.
Alex?
I think what we've discovered is there's really two categories of areas where people are deeply unsatisfied with mail right now. One of those is speed. Everybody complains about Outlook being slow. Gmail is becoming slower. Everything's getting more bloated and slower and slower. The second category is workflow tools. I mean, just nobody's got anything that makes it really easy and natural to decide what to do with all the messages they've got in their inboxes. And so I think that's the need that we've chosen to address is how do we make every email in your inbox actionable? How do we make it so that you don't have to have the mental load of keeping up with things you don't need today? And I think those are the two categories. I do want to speak a little bit more broadly about distribution in general, because that's been a battle that we've fought, across a bunch of different platforms. And what we've found is that no matter what you offer, there aren't that many people going out and searching for that specifically in Google, no matter what your product is. So it tends to spread a lot more by word of mouth and a lot more by your marketing efforts. And we found, for instance, Gmail has been far and away our largest source of organic traffic. I think, the first 2 weeks we launched, we had 50,000 users. And then that's continued to grow organically as people have shared it. And, people who didn't even know they wanted something like our tools, when someone says, hey, check this thing out, they do. On the Outlook side of things, we found about, a tenth of that. And, what we had to do on the Outlook side was find, paid marketing channels that allowed us to put $1 in, get $2 back out. And since it's mostly business users, we've had success there. On the Yahoo platform, it's been really, really hard going.
Sure. Cool. Well, thank you guys. That was actually a really great question to wrap up with, because you guys both shared a little bit of advice. And David, you have some more to add? I'm sorry.
Yeah, talking about distribution, of course, Outlook is part of Office. I mean, Office is what it is. I'm not going to go into details here. We also have Office 365, which is gaining momentum, at least appears so. So we're very excited about that. And I just wanted to insist on the Agave platform. We're very excited about it. We're pretty sure that there's a huge potential in there. And that's definitely where we're going in the future, at least when it comes to integrating with our clients. It doesn't work just in Outlook and Outlook Web App for that matter. It works in Word, Excel, Office in general. And I also wanted to acknowledge that I think we have at least people from Constant Contact and Power Inbox in the room, and they've already invested as early adopters in apps for Outlook in Agave, so maybe they could share their experience if you're interested in listening to them. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that Agave platform is really where we want to go in the future. It's already open. There's a public developer preview that you can go to. It's msdn.microsoft.com/office/apps. You can register there, start right now.
Great. Cool. So there's lots of, those are some great tips around distribution and the differences between platforms and clients. We'll have another talk today. I guess it'll be at about 1:40 on distribution. We'll have the folks from Constant Contact, have the folks from Cloud Sherpas. And also, Roger, you have a product in the Agave store. People can ask him about stuff. But thank you, guys. We're going to bring up Josh here for his panel on email data. Thanks.